Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something that sounds maybe a bit abstract, ancient verbal injury, but trust me, it was anything but abstract back then.
Oh, absolutely not. We're talking slander, defamation, public insults, words that could genuinely destroy lives in ancient Greece and Rome.
Right, not just hurt feelings. We're looking at the actual legal frameworks they built. How did they handle the power of words to wound, to ruin reputations, and, well, sometimes even worse?
And it's so important to kind of set the scene for you. Think about these ancient societies. They were often small, very face-to-face. Your reputation, that wasn't just, what people thought of you. It was basically your currency, your social capital.
Like your most valuable asset.
Easily. A false rumor, a nasty accusation shouted in the agora, it could be totally devastating. Your social standing dictated almost everything. Could you hold office? Could you get a loan? Who would marry your daughter? Lose your good name, and you risk losing.
Well,
everything.
okay, so that's our mission today. We're going to dig into the legal side of protecting that asset. We'll look at Athens first with their specific lawsuit, the Dikakagorias,
The suit for ill-speaking. Very specific.
and then compare that with Rome, where they had this, well, much broader idea of inuria or outrage, which covered slander, but also a lot more.
Exactly. And the real tension we want to explore, the thing that makes this still so relevant, is that struggle they had. How do you protect someone's honor, their status, which was vital, without completely shutting down free speech, especially in politics where things got nasty?
That balancing act sounds familiar.
Oh, it is. Very. Let's start in Athens, then. The famous democracy, birthplace of free speech, Parrhesia.
But Parrhesia wasn't just about saying whatever you wanted, right?
Yeah.
It had a purpose.
Precisely. It wasn't an abstract, like we might think of it today. It was a tool. It was how free men were supposed to engage with each other, hold each other accountable, and ultimately persuade each other towards being, good citizens.
And this wasn't just happening in the assembly. You're saying this public discourse was everywhere.
Everywhere. The courts, obviously, but also in the theater. Think of the biting political satire in Aristophanes' comedies. Even at private dinner parties, the society was constantly talking about itself, constantly defining and redefining its norms.
So it was like a continuous public performance of sorting people.
In a way, yes. Sorting the city into the good citizens, the Krestoi, the Balchones, who should be praised, rewarded, maybe given honors.
And the bad citizens, the kakoi, the poneroi, the ones to be punished, shamed, maybe exiled.
Exactly. And here's the crucial bit. The language they used blurred the lines completely between judging someone's character, their morals, and judging their legal or social standing.
How so? Those words, kakos, poneros, they just mean bad, don't they?
They do, but they were often used, let's say, superatively. They weren't just describing internal morality. They were weapons used to discriminate based on, say, how someone fought in battle, or if they seemed loyal enough, or even just their social class. Calling someone kakos wasn't just like calling them a jerk. It was a public declaration that they were fundamentally flawed as a citizen, that they were actively harmful to the polis, the city-state itself. It had real teeth.
Okay, so if I decide to sue someone using this dike kakagorias, this slander lawsuit, what am I actually suing them for? Just saying mean things? Or did it have to be specific?
Oh, it had to be specific. This is where that Athenian legal formalism comes in. You couldn't just haul someone into court because they, I don't know, insulted your cooking or called you clumsy.
No. So what counted?
You had to prove they used certain prohibited words or made specific types of accusations, things that struck right at the heart of your identity as a citizen.
Like what? Give me some examples.
The classic ones are calling someone murderer or accusing them of robbing graves. That's a big piety issue. Or, crucially, accusing them of cowardice in battle, like saying they threw away their shield, the ripsaspis.
The shield thrower. That was a major disgrace.
Huge. Or accusing someone of beating their parents, another piety violation. Or even calling someone a prostitute, which questioned their civic standing. You see the pattern.
Yeah, they all attack the core duties, right? Respect for the gods, family loyalty, courage for the state.
Exactly. These weren't just random insults. They were accusations of being fundamentally unfit to be an Athenian citizen. They challenged your very membership in the community.
Which leads us to this concept you mentioned, the kakorgos. You said this gives us a real aha moment. How?
It really does. Because kakorgos means something like rogue or malefactor, a generally bad person. But the legal category itself is what's stunning. The Athenians lumped people we'd consider serious violent criminals right alongside people whose main crime was verbal.
Wait, hang on. So under the kakorgos label, you'd find murderers?
Killers, yes. but listed right there at them. You find petty thieves. The sources mention cloak snatchers specifically, and seducers. And crucially for us, people guilty of repeated, serious defamation, public slanderers.
Okay, I need to pause on that. A murderer.
Yeah.
And a guy who snatches cloaks in the street, and someone who just says bad things about people.
Yeah.
They're all kakorgoi. That seems wildly out of proportion. Why was nicking a cloak such a big deal? It's not murder.
It's not about the value of the cloak itself. Think about what it represents. Athens was a crowded city. People needed to trust each other to feel safe walking around. The cloak snatcher, like the housebreaker, shatters that basic trust. They make the city feel insecure.
Okay, so it's about breaching public trust, the fabric of the community.
Exactly. A kakorgos was someone who fundamentally failed that basic test of being a reliable member of the polis. The killer destroys life, the thief destroys security, and the habitual slanderer. They destroy reputation, which, as we said, was vital. They poison the relationships and trust the democracy relies on. The law wasn't just ranking crimes by physical harm, it was ranking them by the damage done to citizenship and community trust.
Wow. Okay, viewed like that, it makes a terrifying kind of sense. And it certainly explains why the law courts became ground zero for political attacks. Destroying someone's reputation was destroying their political life.
Absolutely. The stakes were incredibly high, and we see this play out in the legal speeches. So much effort goes into defining the nature of enmity, of hatred between parties.
Like in a homicide case.
Yeah, a classic example. If you're the defendant, you'd work incredibly hard to prove the killing wasn't premeditated, that it wasn't the result of some long-standing feud. You'd argue it was, a spur-of-the-moment thing, maybe in anger or self-defense.
Why was that distinction so important?
Because a spontaneous act, even a tragic one, might be forgiven or punished less severely. But a killing driven by existing enmity, that paints you as someone who nurses grudges, who acts out of calculated malice, who puts personal feuds above civic harmony. That's a much deeper character flaw in their eyes. It makes you look like a potential kakorgos.
And prosecutors knew exactly how to exploit this. They used the trial itself as a political weapon.
Oh, constantly. Imagine prosecuting a wealthy, powerful opponent. You might say to the jury, look, this man thinks he's above the law, condemn him. Show everyone that Athenian justice cannot be bought. Prove your integrity by punishing his arrogance.
So the verdict becomes a statement about the jury, about the city, as much as about the defendant.
Exactly. Or say the defendant is a really skilled speaker, an eloquent orator. The prosecutor might warn the jury, don't be fooled by his fancy words. He's a demagogue trying to mislead you. Condemning him sends a message to anyone who thinks they can manipulate the people with rhetoric. In Athens, controlling reputation, especially through speech in court, was basically controlling political power. Taking down a rival's character was often the game.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. If Athens had this very specific targeted approach with the dikekagorias, focused on citizenship, how did Rome handle insults and slander? You mentioned in your ear.
Right, inuria. It's a much broader concept. It literally means outrage or insult. Maybe wrongful injury is a good way to think about it. And its scope was, vast compared to the Athenian approach.
So it covered more than just specific slanderous words.
Much more. It definitely included physical assault, getting punched, beaten, that sort of thing. But crucially, it extended way beyond the physical. The Romans deeply understood that an attack on someone's dignitas, their inherent social standing, their honor, their public face, could be just as damaging, if not more so, than a physical blow.
So the system was geared towards protecting social status.
Very much so. Less about specific civic duties like in Athens, and more about maintaining the established social hierarchy. An insult wasn't just personal, it potentially challenged the order of things.
And they had a way to sort of grade the severity. You mentioned inuria atrox.
Atrocious insult. This was a key legal distinction. Whether an inuria was deemed atrocious massively impacted the potential penalty and, importantly, which magistrate would even hear the case. It showed just how sensitive Roman honor culture was.
Okay, so what tipped an insult over the edge into being atrocious? Was it just nastier words?
The words mattered, but it was often about the context. The jurists laid out several factors. First, and maybe most importantly, the person involved.
The status of the person insulted.
Exactly. Insulting a magistrate, someone holding public office, that's automatically serious. Insulting your parent or your atron, someone you had a formal dependency relationship with, that elevates the insult immediately. It's not just you insulting Marcus. It's you disrespecting the office or the family structure or the patronage system. It's an attack on the social fabric.
That makes sense. The higher the status, the bigger the insult's impact. What else?
Second, the place and time. Where and when did it happen?
So public versus private.
Definitely. Committing an insult out in the open, in the forum, maybe during the public games when everyone's watching, that's far worse than a private argument. And doing it right in front of the praetor, the chief legal officer, that's showing incredible contempt for the law itself. The public nature amplified the shame, the loss of face.
So visibility is key. It's the public humiliation the law really targets.
Precisely. Third factor, the nature of the act itself. This is where physical harm comes in more clearly. Inflicting a wound, obviously. Striking someone, especially in the face, that was considered particularly degrading. The sources even mention things like gouging out an eye as inherently atrocious.
Grim. But you said even verbal injury could be atrocious, right? Without any physical contact.
Absolutely. This is crucial. The Roman focus on dignitas was so strong that purely outrageous language could qualify as inuria atrox, depending on who was insulted and where it happened. The praetor's edict, which outlined actionable offenses, was quite clear on this.
So just words alone could be legally atrocious. What about other non-physical things?
Well, the law recognized other ways to inflict public humiliation that weren't direct physical assault. Things like deliberately tearing someone's toga in public, or forcibly seizing their companion, maybe a client or a child, walking with them.
Why those acts?
Because they're designed to publicly humiliate. Tearing clothes makes someone look ridiculous, damaged. Abducting their companion shows they lack control, that they can't protect their dependents. The injury isn't to the body, but to their dignity, their public presentation, their social authority. And the law recognized that damage as inuria, potentially atrox.
This sounds much more flexible, maybe more subjective than the Athenian list of forbidden words. How did the courts actually handle this? How did they decide if an insult was just petty or truly atrocious?
It evolved over time, but by the late Empire, under Justinian, for example, the procedures were pretty established. A civil lawsuit could definitely proceed, even for inuria atrox, for the really serious cases. But magistrates, like the praetor in Rome or the proconsul in the provinces, kept a lot of discretion.
Meaning they weren't just applying fixed fines from a rule book?
Generally, no. While the very early law, like the 12 Tables, had some fixed penalties for specific injuries, so many coins for a broken bone, that kind of thing, by the Republic and Empire, it was much more flexible. The magistrate would assess the damages based on the severity of the outrage, considering the status of both the victim and the offender.
Which sounds like it would inherently protect the elite more.
It absolutely did. The system was structured around status, and there was also a jurisdictional split. The proconsul, for instance, had the power to deal with petty offenses extrajudicially, sort of, outside the formal court process.
What would that involve?
They could investigate quickly, maybe dismiss the case, or perhaps administer a punishment directly. For a free citizen, this might mean a beating with rods. If the offender was a slave, though, the punishment could be whipping. This distinction between the formal process for serious insults and this quicker summary justice for minor ones really highlights how Roman law aimed to maintain social order by tailoring the response to the perceived gravity and the status involved.
Okay, so both societies had these strong legal tools to guard honor. But let's turn to the political arena. It seems these tools weren't just defensive shields. They were often used as weapons, right?
Oh, absolutely. Especially in the cutthroat world of politics, reputation wasn't just something to protect, it was something to actively attack in your rivals.
In Athens, you mentioned military service being core, so accusing someone of cowardice.
That was a prime weapon. Didelia or anandria, cowardice or unmanliness. Throwing that accusation at a political opponent wasn't just personal. It forced everyone to think about citizen duty, military failure, and who was to blame. It was incredibly potent.
The famous case is Demosthenes after Chaeronea, right?
Yeah.
The battle where Athens basically lost its independence to Macedon.
A total disaster. And his political enemy, Aeschines, tried to pin it all on him, prosecuting him, aiming to destroy his career by blaming him for the defeat. Demosthenes was cornered. He had to defend his own honor, but also the honor of the entire city that had followed his policies and fought in that battle.
How did he manage that? It seems like an impossible position.
His defense was a masterclass in manipulating honor and blame. He completely sidestepped the issue of personal failure. Instead, he brilliantly reframed the whole thing. He essentially asked the jury, the Athenian people, to see his political choices and his courage as identical to their own values and their courage.
So he tied his fate directly to theirs.
Exactly. And then he blamed the loss not on bad policy or lack of courage, but on touche fortune, chance, the uncontrollable will of the gods. He argued that neither he nor they could be held responsible for mere bad luck.
And it worked.
Amazingly, yes. The jury acquitted him, voting massively against Aeschines. They chose collectively not to accept the shame of cowardice or failure. By saving Demosthenes' reputation, they saved their own. The character assassination attempt failed because he successfully appealed to their shared honor and deflected blame onto fortune.
That's using honor defensively within a democracy.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned slander being used to overthrow democracy, the example of Dionysius in Syracuse.
Yes, a chilling example of how verbal injury can pave the way for tyranny. Dionysius wanted sole power. After getting himself elected as one of several generals, his next move was pure reputational warfare against his colleagues.
He couldn't just arrest them?
Not yet. He didn't have the power. So he used insinuation. He deliberately kept his distance from the other generals. Then he started spreading rumors, whispering campaigns, suggesting they were incompetent, maybe even disloyal to Syracuse, that they were mishandling the war effort.
So planting seeds of doubt through slander.
He manufactured a crisis of confidence. He built up this atmosphere of suspicion purely through words. Once public opinion was sufficiently poisoned against them,
Then he made his move.
then he struck. He went before the assembly and openly accused them, leveraging the very fears and suspicions he himself had stoked. And the people, panicked and confused, did exactly what he wanted. They deposed the other generals and elected him sole commander with absolute authority. That was a critical step towards his tyranny, built squarely on a foundation of slander.
That's terrifying. And it gets even darker when we look at Rome, especially under dictators like Sulla. When someone held that kind of absolute power, what happened to the legal protections for citizens?
They basically vanished. The most fundamental protection a Roman citizen had was provocatio, the right to appeal a magistrate's capital or corporal sentence to the assembly of the people. Under a dictator like Sulla, or later during periods like the Triumvirate, provocatio was suspended, meaning the dictator or the magistrate acting under him had sole unappealable power over a citizen's life, liberty, and property. All those careful rules about inuria, about trials, about assessing damages, they just went out the window.
And this is where Sulla's prescriptions come in. These were basically death lists.
Exactly, and the sources are clear. Sulla issued these mass death sentences, often with no legal hearing whatsoever, no trial, no chance to defend yourself, no appeal. Your name appeared on a list posted publicly, and that was your death warrant.
So in that context, a simple accusation, a whisper in Sulla's ear, that could be fatal.
Instantly fatal. Sulla didn't need proof or a court verdict. He just needed the public notification, the name, and the penalty. Slander, in that political climate, became functionally equivalent to a death sentence.
And there were rewards for killing the prescribed.
Huge rewards. Plus, their property was confiscated, often enriching Sulla's supporters. People were put on the list simply because they were wealthy, based on nothing more than rumor or the greed of an informer. It weaponized accusation on an industrial scale.
A state-sanctioned murder fueled by slander and greed.
Absolutely. It got so arbitrary, the sources say sometimes the public notice naming the victim and confirming their death sentence was actually posted after they'd already been tracked down and killed. It shows the complete collapse of legal protection when power is absolute and unchecked. Verbal injury becomes the trigger for immediate destruction.
This whole struggle, then, between protecting honor, allowing speech, and defining what's legally just, it clearly runs deep. It wasn't just about specific laws. It touched on fundamental questions.
It really did, and you can see this tension reflected even in the way they thought about law itself. Early legal systems, both Greek and Roman, often relied heavily on what we call formalism.
Meaning strict adherence to procedure.
Yeah, getting the words exactly right, performing the ritual correctly. Think about early Roman contract law, like the famous stipulatio. It wasn't enough to just agree on something. You had to use a very specific question and answer formula.
Can you give an example?
Sure. For a promise to be legally binding under stipulatio, one person had to ask, using a specific verb like spondesni, do you solemnly promise, say, to deliver a particular slave? And the other person had to immediately reply using the exact same verb, spondeo, I solemnly promise.
That sounds incredibly rigid. Why?
Well, think about it. In a society where literacy wasn't universal, where written contracts weren't always feasible or trusted, this oral formalism was actually quite clever. It created a clear, memorable, public moment of obligation. Though witnesses heard the specific words, it made it much harder later for someone to say, oh, I didn't really agree to that, or I misunderstood. The ritual itself guaranteed the seriousness and the terms.
So the rigid form actually provided certainty and protected reputations in a way.
Exactly. And that emphasis on form, on status, carried over into other areas. Even when dealing with freedmen, former slaves, the legal structures often maintain the inequality, reinforcing the former master's superior status.
Weren't they free?
Legally, yes, but the manumission agreement might, for instance, give the former master the right to punish the freedmen for certain behaviors, not sell them back into slavery, but still punish them. Or it might require the freedmen to use arbitration run by the patron for work disputes. The legal forms were used to preserve the power dynamic, the honor difference.
It keeps coming back to status and honor, which brings us to those philosophical debates. You mentioned Socrates and Hippias arguing about justice.
Right. It's a classic exchange that shows the difficulty. Hippias demands Socrates define the just. Socrates initially gives a very internal, moral answer. Justice is basically not being willing to do injustice. It's about your inner disposition.
But that's hard to put into a law code.
Exactly what Hippias implies. He wants something concrete, something a court can use. So Socrates, pushed for a practical definition, eventually offers the thesis that the lawful is the just.
So shifting from internal morality to external rules.
And that dialogue captures the core dilemma perfectly. How do you translate these deeply felt internal concepts like honor and justice into workable external legal rules and procedures, especially when those rules are shaped by politics and power?
And finally, there's that great story from Cicero about Themistocles and Aristides. It really seems to crystallize why honor trumped almost everything else.
It's a powerful illustration of that calculation. Utilitas versus honestas. Usefulness versus honor.
So after the Greeks defeated the Persians, Themistocles, the Athenian general, had a secret plan.
A very cunning, very useful plan. He told the Athenian assembly he had an idea that would guarantee Athens' supremacy forever, but it had to remain secret. They told him to share it with just one person, Aristides, who was famously nicknamed the Just. His integrity was absolute.
So Aristides gets told the secret plan. What was it?
The plan was to secretly sail to where the allied Spartan fleet was docked and burn it. Destroy their naval power completely. Utterly ruthless, but strategically brilliant, supremely useful for Athens.
And what did Aristides the Just tell the assembly?
He came back and simply reported this. Themistocles' counsel was, quote, thoroughly useful, but in no way honorable.
That's all he said. Useful, but not honorable.
That's it. And here's the kicker. The Athenian assembly, based only on Aristides' judgment that the plan was dishonorable, rejected it outright. They didn't even ask what the plan was.
Wow. They chose honor over guaranteed dominance.
They did, because for them, what was not honorable could not ultimately be truly useful. That deep, almost visceral commitment to honestas is why protecting reputation, protecting honor through laws against slander and insult was so fundamentally important in their world. It wasn't a trivial matter, it was central to their identity.
This has been fascinating. A real deep dive into how words could wound and how ancient law tried to stitch things back together. We've seen Athens with its dike kategorias, really zeroing in on protecting the specific markers of citizenship, even labeling slanderers as dangerous as a cougar goy.
Right alongside killers and thieves damaging the community's trust.
Yeah.
And then Rome, with the sweeping concept of injuria, creating this elaborate system to measure outrage, especially atrocious insult based on status, location, the act itself, all focused on protecting that crucial dignitas.
Both systems showing just how high the stakes were, how language could be a literal weapon in politics and social life.
And it's striking, isn't it? The challenges they faced back then, trying to manage that explosive mix of personal honor, political rivalry, public speech, and the potential for utter reputational ruin, they feel remarkably similar to the battles we still fight today over defamation law, free speech, online harassment, and cancel culture.
Which leads us perfectly into our final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If those ancient systems, which often seemed, let's be honest, less bothered about finding the objective, factual truth of an insult, and much more focused on preventing the loss of honor, the damage to status, if that reflected their core values.
Then what does our modern legal obsession, especially in, say, U.S. defamation law with proving things like actual malice or reckless disregard for the truth, tell us about our priorities? What values are we really trying to protect today when reputation and speech collide so violently? Something to definitely mull over.